Hey folks and gals, are you ready for a roller coaster ride of enthralling combat, mystical charms, and unforeseen alliances? Dive into the fantastical realm of Tsugomomo, where ordinary objects conceal magical spirits. Kazuya Kagami, an average high school student, discovers his late mother's obi is haunted by a powerful and sassy spirit named Kiriha. Suddenly, he finds himself the heart of spectral battles and caught up in a world beyond human comprehension. Let's delve into it. Arvenheim starts by explaining what a Tsukomogami is. These are common objects that over time become possessed by spirits. Immediately after, we are taken to a kind of flashback where our protagonist, Kazuya Kagami, sees a girl with blue hair and a beautiful kimono walking away from him. Back in reality, we learn that the kimono was once part of a dress Kazuya's mother wore when she was younger, so he kept the obi or sash to tie the kimono as a family keepsake that he decided to cherish for the nostalgia it brings. However, things get a bit eerie when a wig starts attacking Kazuya after school, and suddenly, the obi takes the form of the same blue-haired girl he saw in his dream. This waifu is precisely a Tsukomogami, which in other words is a kind of primary stage to a spirit in Japanese folklore, in other words a yokai. She starts fighting the crazy girl with a wig who attacked Kazuya and forces the poor guy to swear loyalty to her as her servant if he doesn't want to lose his life. In the end, it turns out that the girl with the wig was innocent and wanted to be Kazuya's girlfriend, but she never gathered the courage, and her wig became a cursed object due to her feelings. Back at home, Kazuya has vague memories of having seen the girl with the obi before. And although it seems to be related to his mother's past, the most important thing is that as soon as he tries to sleep, the girl in the kimono manifests herself out of nowhere in his bed. This is where Kiriha is finally introduced, a spirit born from the obi of Kazuya's mother with a somewhat twisted attitude. In these cases, the object's bearer is the master, but Kiriha prefers to reverse the roles, making Kazuya keep his promise to be her servant. Apart from that, Kiriha is not much different from a normal person. She even likes things like sweets and video games, and peculiarly has emotions that make her feel calm next to Kazuya. She often mentions that there are many things they used to do together, but since Kazuya doesn't remember them very well, she prefers to enjoy the feeling of familiarity, especially because she sees how the only memory of his mother is still being cared for over the years. The next morning, Kazuya returns to his student life where Chisato, the class delegate, scolds him as always for being lazy and late to class. Funny enough, this time it wasn't entirely his fault for not waking up early. Instead, he had a little inconvenience with Kiriha as she not only destroyed the alarm but also wanted to accompany him to school. During lunchtime, while getting to know Shiru and Osamu, they hear rumors among their classmates that ghosts tend to appear and torment students after classes. However, before they can finish discussing this, Chisato arrives and separates them, asking Kazuya to join her in finishing the assignments he didn't do. In the library, Chisato has some flashbacks of when they were younger and used to do the same things at Kazuya's house. It turns out that besides being the class representative, she is also his only childhood friend. Ironically, all this time they spent together made Chisato develop feelings for Kazuya. She asks if she can come to his house several days a week to help him, but unfortunately, he can't think about that now because he first has to deal with Kiriha's craziness, so he rejects her offer. When they are done, they try to leave the library, but supernaturally, nothing can be opened and the wall clock is stopped. As expected, Kiriha was going to find a way to get into Kazuya's school, but surprisingly, her presence is quite useful. It appears that a spirit has trapped the three of them in the library. In summary, there are two types of Tsukomogami: the Tsugomomo, born from objects cared for by their masters, and the Amasoji, born from violent or uncontrolled human emotions. The spirits like Kiriha have their own consciousness and can reason, while others, like the wig that attacked them yesterday, behave like mischievous babies. After clarifying all this, it can focus on the main problem, and Kiriha explains that the best way to capture an Amasoji is to find its desire and resolve the hatred it holds within its body. After searching for a while with no other option, Kiriha decides to use some brute force to find the core, but she realizes that the possessed object is not just one. It's actually the entire library. Fortunately, while Kiriha engages in a tremendous battle against a golem made of books, Kazuya manages to find out that the Amasoji's desire was born when he rejected Chisato's invitation to study at her house. With this in mind, Kazuya understands that to break the hatred of the spirit, all he needs to do is respond to his friends sincerely and extend a new invitation to meet again like in the old times. However, the next morning, Kiriha confesses that the problem with the library was not entirely Chisato's fault, as the Malison was behind it all. In summary, the Malison is an ancient, omnipresent entity that has been present since the beginning of creation. It is described as so powerful that it not only reacts to the will of others to distort reality, but also had the ability to shape the world to its liking. However, this Malison is controlled by the local deity, known as Kami in Japanese Shinto religion. So in short, If this thing got out of control, it's because Kukuri is not doing her job properly. To better understand who Kukuri is, we have to go back to the past, specifically when Kiriha and an exorcist woman had to seal Kazuya's memories because of a demon. Since that day, at Kyusen Shrine, Kukuri has been preserving peace in the city to prevent the Malison from being released again, just like it did years ago. It seems that the recent appearance of Kiriha in Kazuya's life has destabilized Kukuri's control over the Malison. Now Kokuyo, one of her servants, is searching for Kazuya to take him to the temple where the ritual was performed for the first time. Naturally, Kiriha won't let them take her new companion so easily, and after giving Kokuyo a beating, they go to talk to Kukuri about the situation. Although Kukuri initially seems like a tough character due to her mask, she actually has a friendly personality. All she wants is to check on Kazuya because, as they explain, the seal on him has started to weaken. However, since the seal is not completely broken, Kukuri cannot renew it. Instead, she offers Kazuya a job as an exorcist to keep it under control. From that moment on, Kazuya becomes an exorcist of the Malison, as it turns out that this entity has always been with him. Since birth, he has carried what is known as the root of danger. Kiriha doesn't want her boy to take on a responsibility that doesn't belong to him. The local deity then says she will let him go if they don't accept the task. The group refuses, which leads to a battle. Kukuri seems to control water and attacks with high-pressure water droplets. Kiriha tries to fight back but appears to be at a disadvantage. With no other options, Kukuri decides to kill Kazuya because he refused her proposal, or she will harm Chisato. In the end, an immense power hangs over our protagonists. The next episode begins with Kiriha managing to stop the massive water attack, but unfortunately, this has weakened her considerably. Ultimately, she fails to stop the new attack, and our characters lose consciousness. In a kind of dream, Kazuya meets a woman named Kanaka, a mysterious woman who asks him to save Kiriha from an ancient promise she made, a promise that no longer belongs to her, but she still assumes it. The solution is for Kazuya to become stronger, so he can protect her instead of the way things are now. The woman provides him with the means to awaken his powers. You must remember Kiriha's real name. Kazuya regains consciousness and to some extent recovers some of his memories. He finally calls the waifu by her true name, Ayasakura. She is somewhat surprised to see that her master has not entirely forgotten her, and with this in mind, she decides to lend her obi's powers to try and face Kukuri. Despite putting up a tremendous counterattack in front of a goddess, they ultimately lose the battle, and Kazuya has no choice but to accept becoming an exorcist to keep Kiriha safe. After all this, the goddess's mask falls and the kids learn her true identity. She is just a little girl. Apparently, this young priestess had planned this confrontation from the beginning. In summary, what Kukuri wanted was to force Kazuya to use his control over Ayasakura so that he would gradually realize that his connection to the world of exorcists could be more than a curse. Back at home, things return to normal, but the problem is that Kiriha can't stop thinking about what she saw during the battle, since that obe technique is something only Kanaka knew how to use when she was its owner. In a kind of flashback, they explain that a long time ago, when Kazuya was just a baby, Kanaka promised her owner that she would protect him from any danger if he were ever left alone. Finally, we understand what the mysterious woman meant when she said that Kiriha was still attached to an ancient promise, and even though Kazuya doesn't know much about it, he still decides to take on the responsibility of being the one to protect her from anything that tries to separate them. The next morning, our waifu decides to start the special training so that Kazuya can gain enough strength to become an exorcist. As she cannot currently use her Tsukumogami powers, someone has to step up to defend the city from spiritual threats. The problem is that despite demonstrating great skill with the obi during his fight with Kukuri, for some reason that even he doesn't understand, Kazuya can't figure out how to replicate those movements again. Later that night, Kiriha explains that by adopting a human appearance, Tsukumomo limit their powers through the body they inhabit. They could even if injured in the same way as an ordinary person. However, things change when they return to their natural state, that is, their object form, as each one has unique abilities. For example, Ayasakura can easily heal minor wounds. With this in mind, Kazuya continues to undergo rigorous training from his waifu because he hasn't shown full control of the obi yet. He must continue strengthening his body to at least withstand enemy attacks. On top of all this, the protagonist must also deal with his student life. Now that the student council president knows he possesses a Tsugomomo, he occasionally asks for help with spiritual problems at school. If you recall, Tadataka is the same person who was possessed by the Whigs some time ago. But what really matters here is that on that very day, the classrooms start disappearing one by one, until the entire hallway becomes a dead end. Kiriha immediately realizes that this is the work of an Amasoji, which apparently manifested because the president denied permission for the tabletop gaming club. Fortunately, Kazuya is quite resourceful in dealing with these situations. He realizes that all the passageways and monsters created by the Amasoji are erasable since their energy source originates from the notebook where the club member drew them. Thanks to this deduction, Kazuya combines his Ayasakura's abilities with the assistance of his friend Osamu, and together, they resolve the Emisoji problem, completely destroying the object to prevent its future use. A few days later, Chisato's classmate confesses his feelings to her, but she rejects him because she's already in love with someone else. The protagonist is a bit slow in understanding hints, partially because his memories from childhood were sealed. However, that's not the real issue. The next morning, for some strange reason, Kazuya's world transforms into something resembling a dating simulation game, akin to what Japanese otaku play to feel loved. Obviously, this is the result of an Emisoji's longing, which according to Kiriha's assumption, must be because his creator was playing such a simulator and felt terrible after being rejected by the girls. With a clearer picture, Kazuya starts connecting the dots and realizes that the source of the spirit is the same boy whom Chisato rejected the previous day. Unfortunately, the intensity of this longing changes Chisato's personality. She stops being kind to Kazuya and becomes a student who only has eyes for Hiroshi, the boy in question. Seeing how complicated the situation has become, Kiriha instructs Kazuya to buy some time while she tries to find the dating simulation game and reset it from scratch. Although it's a bit embarrassing to admit, Osamu is the only otaku who can help them with this, and ironically, he doesn't take it as an insult, but rather believes his time has been well spent dismantling the simulation system. Thanks to Osamu's intelligence and knowledge of visual novels, he reveals all the patterns Kazuya needs to follow to win back his best friend and begin the conquest plan to win her heart again. So Kazuya suddenly finds himself in the role of an otaku trying to woo the tsundere girl in his class. It's similar to what he goes through daily, but remember, he's a bit slow and doesn't fully grasp these things. Despite trying to force awkward dialogue and interactions, Kazuya fails to complete the game phase and loses all the progress he had made with Chisato. To make matters worse, Kiriha also fails to locate the Emisoji's longing. At this point, their only option is to turn to Osamu's obscure knowledge and apply a couple of tricks to bypass the event chains. Kazuya has an advantage over Hiroshi, his childhood friend, as there may be clues from their past that could trigger what Chisato feels for him. With these words, Kazuya recalls that when they were children, they'd exchanged rag dolls and played together in a toy house. Chisato remembers this as well and the promise they made to do it again someday. In the end, the two friends managed to break the spirit's source, but they hadn't noticed that the possessed version of the dating simulation game was for adults. Despite that revelation not changing much about Kazuya's relationship with his best friend, let's fast forward to the next morning. Kiriha visits Kuruki to ask her a few things that have been on her mind. It turns out that in their past, Kiriha was much stronger even without her masks, but seeing her now so small and weakened, she begins to doubt whether she really wants to create the purifier or if it's just for her own benefit. In the afternoon, as Kiriha didn't get much information, she decides to distress by having dinner with her family. Yes, although Kazuya doesn't know it yet, Kiriha has already introduced herself to his sister, Kasumi. Surprisingly, Kazuya's father doesn't have any issues with her presence. In fact, he feels at ease having her back home. In short, in case you haven't figured it out yet, a mysterious woman we saw in the Divine Realm, who the former Ayasakura's host is actually Kanaka, Kazuya's mother. This explains Kiriha's strong connection with Kazuya's past and his family. With a clear understanding, later that same night, Kokuri and Kokuyu move into Kazuya's house because after their last fight, the temple was destroyed and they were living under a park slide. Ironically, Kazuya's father didn't oppose the idea, much because our waifu has leverage over him due to embarrassing moments he remembers from his past, allowing her to do whatever she wants for her own benefit. As this accommodation is only temporary, the priestess is forced to go to the Kanera shrine the next morning to request a small loan to rebuild her old home. Here they meet Taguri Kanayama, a deity who is Kukuri's friend. In the past, Taguri had given her large amounts of money to satisfy her needs and whims. However, there's a condition to earn the money. One must draw the correct pairs in a memory game she proposes with her special cards. At first, this activity seems relatively normal, but there's a small detail that Kukuri didn't tell them about the Kanera Shrine. It's a place designed for girls to fulfill their somewhat desires. After some yuri between the waifus, a few uncomfortable moments for Kazuya, and a poorly executed plan, they managed to get the money they needed in exchange for their dignity. At least now, Kukuri can rebuild her home in a couple of weeks. However, while the workers continue with the construction of the temple, the priestess will have to stay a little longer in Kazuya's house. This is somewhat troublesome because it affects Kiriha, who now has to help with household chores to avoid running out of her beloved flans. Ironically, despite the gravity of the situation, our waifu decides to collaborate as much as possible to continue enjoying her tranquility and desserts. Additionally, this experience strengthens her special relationship with Kukuri. Back at school, for some inexplicable reason, when the protagonist enters his classroom, he discovers that Shira has managed to form a complete harem with his classmates in just one day. As expected, this unusual event can only be the work of an emisoji, as these days there will be a greater concentration of malevolence, causing spirits of this kind to become more unruly. Fortunately, since Shiro is not very clever, the protagonist quickly gathers information and understands that the main object responsible for this situation is a perfume he applied in the morning. In short, Shiro's desire to be popular among women was manifested in a cologne that releases a strong aroma, turning all men into beasts and women into his devoted companions. Of course, all of this is rooted in the fact that Shiro has been rejected many times, but the critical point is when, by accident, all the perfume lotion falls onto our protagonist, subjecting him to the powers of the Emisogi. Initially, Kazuya doesn't pay much attention to the strength of this desire. However, things change when he remembers that he lives with a bunch of women and unwittingly ends up bathing with all of them at once, creating a classic harem scene. Ultimately, the protagonist has no choice but to break the perfume bottle by himself. Unfortunately, this causes something called the return of the malevolence, which essentially means that the Emisogi's negative effects return to its creator. We will hear this term frequently in Kazuya's new role. After a couple of weeks with the Hakusen Shrine reconstructed, he can resume his training to become an exorcist. Regarding the return of the malevolence days later, Kiriha explains that the strength of this curse depends on how the Emisogi is destroyed. For instance, in the case of the wig, since she was the one who broke it, Tadataka suffered the consequence of going bald. However, when things are done properly, these returns do not manifest. This was evident in the library problem, where Chisato suffered no ill effects because the spirit departed peacefully after seeing its creator's wish fulfilled. With a clearer understanding, the student council president informs them of recent sightings of a mysterious student who scares her classmates in the bathroom, requesting somewhat suspicious things. The problem is that this girl is Iko Nago, a young girl who took her life years ago without leaving a reason behind. Now it seems she has returned in the form of an Amisogi to retrieve something she left behind. Since she is not a direct ghost, Kazuya and his friends need to step up their investigation to find the source of her desire. Unfortunately, hardly anyone in the school wants to provide concrete information because Aiko's death did not significantly impact their lives. Despite this, they eventually discover Nanakai, the head of the journalism club, who has been actively searching for more clues about the case. Thanks to Nanakai's efforts, they stumble upon a supposed fan club that was devoted to the handsome guy from their school. Consequently, they find Aiko's spiritual manifestation, who seemingly only wants to recover a letter that she received the day before taking her life. However, since the protagonist is still somewhat inexperienced in handling the obi, he accidentally releases the Amisogi, forcing them to start over. Nevertheless, this initial encounter helps Kiriha realize that the bearer of the desire is a different person from the ghost. To avoid causing a return, they must find the person responsible for this grudge. As the story unfolds, it is revealed that Iko was bullied by her classmates because she was the only girl who managed to capture the heart of the popular boy in their class. The most disturbing part is that it was discovered that this young girl had a sister, and surprisingly, that sister is Nanakai, the school reporter. Although the motive for the grudge originated from Nanakai's desire to understand why Aiko took her own life, she couldn't help but feel hatred towards the girls who bullied her sister daily. In reality, those girls wanted to liberate Aiko from the fan club rather than harm her. Upon this confession, the protagonist discovers the letter that the ghost had been seeking. The letter explains all the hardships Aiko had to endure from not being able to express her true feelings to the strange growth that appeared in the middle of her. Initially perceived as harmless, the growth eventually compelled Aiko to believe it was pushing her to eliminate her sister to prevent her from taking the man she liked. Feeling cornered, she chose to end her life to protect her younger sister, and Nanakai blamed herself for Aiko's death. This feeling of guilt became the core of the Amisogi, which Kazuya ultimately defeats with impressive moves. With the problem resolved, Kazuya and his friends can give their new friend another chance to leave behind Aiko's past and start living life as she would have wanted. In the end, as Kiriha wisely says, it would be wrong to let Aiko's sacrifice be in vain. However, when Kazuya destroyed the source, he unknowingly caused an inconvenience to Nanakai. Days later, she arrives with the news that she has lost her voice, but in reality, that doesn't end up being the real problem, as the young girl understands that all of this is the consequence of her actions. The important moment occurs when the protagonist was about to leave school, and out of nowhere, a half-crazed redhead starts attacking him. After a while, we realize she wasn't alone. She also had a Tsugomomo as her companion. This is where we meet Sunao Sumeragi, an exorcist who came to find our young man to test if he has the ability to become the successor of Ayasakura. In short, this girl has just learned about Kanaka's death, and that her son is now the bearer of the obi to continue her mother's work. With this in mind, she went to Kyukuri to ask for permission to challenge Kazuya to a duel, thus seeing if he truly deserves the position. The thing is, once the misunderstanding is cleared up, Sunao reveals her true intentions, explaining that traditionally only one purifier has been chosen per region, and she believes that both the protagonist and Kiriha are not ready to assume their responsibility. This is how the redhead proposes the duel to the death to demonstrate who has the necessary capabilities to become this city's protector. However, before that, they first explain a bit about the somewhat sad past that this girl had to live through. In summary, Sunao lost her older brother because of Tsugomomo, but in her mind, the foolish idea remained that it was all due to the weakness of Kotetsu, the katana he used as his Tsugomomo. Interesting part of her story is that everything changed the day she met Kanaka, a woman who was the complete opposite of her. Kanaka not only had a beautiful relationship with Kiriha, who was more mature at that time, but instead of becoming her enemy, she preferred to become her teacher to help her control her powers. Now back to the present, Sunao tells the protagonist that he will never measure up to his mother, and because of that, she will be the one to take her place as the local exorcist, allowing him to return to his sad life as a mere human. These words make Kazuya fall into depression because he feels that all he has done so far is bring misfortune to the people who have gotten close to him, referring to all the returns he has caused during his time as an apprentice. Obviously, Kiriha can't help but be angry with our young man because upon hearing this, she feels that she has failed in her mission as a Tsugomomo and, above all, has failed in the promise she made to Kanaka years ago. However, it is thanks to his sincerity and the way he asks her that somehow, besides regaining her original size, the waifu can open her heart and tell him that he can't give up so easily since she wouldn't be anything without him by her side. This is how Kazuya realizes that he wouldn't be anything without his only companion, so by the next morning, he decides to set aside his depression and focus on his training. Up until now, all they know is that Sunao memorized all of Ayasakura's abilities during the time she spent fighting her teacher. However, there's something that both they and we can see from afar as a weakness, and that is the terrible relationship that the redhead has with her Tsugomomo. Basically, she treats Kotetsu as a tool and doesn't take into account its feelings or opinions. After a couple of days, while our pals recharge their energies for tomorrow's fight, the protagonist enters the Divine Realm to have a chat with Kanaka. It turns out that this week, Kiriha has been acting a bit differently, showing glimpses of affection instead of her usual grumpy self. The good news is that the explanation for this is quite simple. The waifu is under trying to hide her protective instincts towards the protagonist with her rough and brusque attitude. Back in the real world, the day of the duel arrives, where both Kazuya and Sunao put their into water totems to prevent during the confrontation. However, this doesn't apply to their belongings, so they must be careful not to damage their Tsugomomo's physical bodies. In the duel, we see that our young man performs much better than expected. He manages to land several good blows on the redhead, and as expected, her biggest weakness lies in never listening to Kotetsu. Despite Sunao compensating for her lack of intelligence with pure brute force, it's not enough to break Kazuya's determination to protect Ayasakura, and above all, his beloved Kiriha. These feelings, combined with the bond between our pals, create the perfect energy to execute a plan that not only defeats the redhead entirely, but also makes her finally understand that Tsugomomo are not mere tools. The hidden card up their sleeves is something called divine possession, a move where both the soul of the bearer and the spirit of the object synchronize perfectly to unleash its hidden potential. In this case, the ancient Obi of Ayasakura. Thanks to this overwhelming victory, Sunao comes to understand that she still has a long way to go if she wants to be like them. She must start by letting go of the hatred she feels towards what happened with her brother and Kotetsu. With not much more to say, the redhead admits her defeat to Kazuya, who, after the fight, instantly faints due to the effects of divine possession. According to Kiriha's explanation, this technique grants its bearer temporary inhuman power, but also drains a lot of energy from the Tsugomomo it interacts with, resulting in both ending up exhausted when they break the connection. Obviously, this effect is intensified when dealing with novice exorcists. Later that same day, once he regains consciousness to some extent, the waifus decide to take care of him until his energy is restored. Thanks to Kukuri's excellent care and a little reward Kiriha gives him at night while everyone is asleep, Kazuya can move again the next morning to resume his life as a student. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Suzuri, the redhead's mother, scolds her daughter for losing the duel against a novice like Kazuya. She tells her that now that she has stained the family's honor, she only has two options to inherit what rightfully belongs to her. The first is to kill our young man, which seems nearly impossible given what he has shown in battle. The second is to marry him and make him the leader of their clan. With this in mind, it becomes clear that Kazuya's life from now on will be anything but normal. Even when he enters his class, he finds out that Kiriha will be his new companion, marking the beginning of another crazy chapter in his life alongside its Tsugomomo, who seeks to fulfill a promise from her past. Before our second season, we have an extra episode. Ironically, since our waifu is not accustomed to behaving properly in crowded places, her interactions with the protagonist often resemble those of a married couple rather than exorcists. The good thing is that amidst the challenges, Kazuya enjoys seeing her happy, and although it's a bit difficult for him to admit, he also cherishes the more private moments they share. At the same time, we see that the relationship between Sunao and Kotetsu has become less distant, and at least the redhead shows a bit more trust when they interact, resembling a friendship. A few days after these events, for some reason that even the protagonist himself doesn't understand, he ends up alone with Kokuyo. She wants to find a way to thank him for everything he has done, providing them with a place to live. However, she feels that the only thing valuable she has to offer is her services, given her ample attributes. Nevertheless, Kazuya tells her that it's not true. She is much more beautiful than she believes. He encourages her to give herself a chance to show that she can be more than just a priestess with a voluptuous body. Thanks to his words, Kokuyo feels a bit more at ease with her insecurities. Later that night, the protagonist goes back to his usual routine of reading a book with his waifu before going to sleep. The downside is that, being distracted, he forgets to hide his material, and Kiriha decides to take advantage of this to play a small prank and gather information to possibly use in the future. We start by watching a couple of things that happen between Kazuya and all of the women living in the house. However, we focus on the nightmare Kazuya had while sleeping, where he not only sees his mother and sister dress as local temple priestesses, but also witnesses Kiriha eliminating Kanaka. What? Nevertheless, the protagonist doesn't pay much attention to these details and decides to continue with his student routine. However, it becomes increasingly complicated whenever our waifu says things that aren't true or easily misunderstood. Despite the incidents they face with Amisogi, the gang has decided to create a club to address their peers' problems and make it easier to deal with such challenges, especially avoiding the effects of a return. Naturally, since Kazuya cannot do all this alone, he seeks help from Osamu, Chisato, and Shiru, the only people he can trust, as they understand how destructive these spirits can be. After Kiriha explains the effects of the curse on Tsukumogami, the group starts their new mission as the Student Counseling Club. Through this, the protagonist realizes that it's not his fault that Amisogi are infecting the school. While he can attract them more easily, he is also the only one who can deal with these problems. A few hours later, they begin their first spiritual case, which involves a thief who strikes just after swimming classes. Since they don't have much information, Kazuya sets a trap for the Amisogi to find the perpetrator. Unfortunately, the creature takes the bait and, when cornered, reveals a much stronger true form than they expected. However, the protagonist notices an essential detail: the stolen belongs to Chisato. Kiriha realizes that the possession didn't come from the girl herself, but was a factor from the outside affecting the curse. In short, when an object is forgotten for a long time, it can become Amisogi, but this process usually takes decades. Therefore, someone or something must have intervened to accelerate it. The bad news doesn't end there, as the next morning, Kazuya has the same nightmare again, where he sees Kiriha's fight, but this time Kanaka is wearing a black obi, and it's his waifu projecting Ayasakura. Seeking answers, he turns to Kukuri, who ironically knows what's happening but avoids the topic, realizing that the divine possession's effects are affecting the protagonist's seal. This technique connects the Tsugomomos and the bearer's minds, combining their memories and past into a single consciousness, allowing Kazuya to recall more from his childhood. Later that day, Kiriha visits Sunao, wanting to apologize for her past hostile behavior and show how their battle helped her grow as a person and a bearer. However, she also seeks to know more about Kanaka's death. In a serious tone, Kiriha confesses that her former owner didn't die naturally but was possessed by an Amisogi. She had to put an end to her life. Afterward, Kazuya goes to Sunao's house, invited by her mother, who wants them to marry and restore the family's pride. Sunao maintains a barrier in her heart but resorts to a mix of her twisted personality and some violence to convince Kazuya to be her fake boyfriend for a while. Suzuri doesn't fall for the lie easily, but she shares the story of how she married her current husband, who wasn't initially the muscular man he is now. Her family's condition was that only the man who could strike her with a sword would be chosen to marry her, almost impossible due to her tremendous strength. However, a bathroom accident brought Susumu into her life, and he ended up being the chosen one. A couple of weeks later, back at school, the gang's counseling club is a huge success. They have received numerous requests, ranging from trivial matters to deeply personal issues. Shiro's love letter mishap leads him to become the boyfriend of Mitsuri, a girl from the track club who is friends with his real crush, Mana. Mitsuri has always been jealous of Mana, feeling overshadowed by her in races, attributes, and love relationships. Their discussions the next morning become a strange mix of jealousy and envy, creating an uncomfortable misunderstanding for Shiro. To clarify the situation, Kazuya confronts Mitsuri, explaining that the Amisogi is using her frustration to offer something fake. However, he discovers that the object containing the spirit's desire actually belongs to Mana, a pair of shoes she lent Mitsuri to improve her training. This curse originated the day they met. Upon uncovering the truth, the Amisogi fully possesses Mitsuri, putting Kazuya in a difficult situation. His only option is to destroy the object and hope the return won't be too severe. Mitsuri remembers that Mana did all this because she loves her and decides to confront the hate with love, giving her a heartfelt. Unfortunately, an external force intervenes, increasing the curse's concentration and creating a stronger Amasogi that forces the gang to activate the divine possession. Kazuya is left with no choice but to destroy the object himself, but despite trying to avoid it, Mitsuri experiences the effects of the return in the form of paralysis in her legs. This event makes Kiriha understand that these phenomena are not normal, especially considering Mana's appearance during the increased energy presence. Ironically, soon after this realization, strange things start happening at school. One morning, so many students are absent that classes have to be suspended. In the midst of the chaos, Shiro tells his friends that all this started when Takeyama, one of their classmates, was absent due to a severe sleep disorder. Kazuya begins investigating to determine the number of affected students, and Kiriha decides to bring Kukuri to join the counseling group. Having an expert in spiritual matters will help them deal with any problems. However, despite searching the runes of the first 3 affected students, they find no traces of an Amasogi or the aura of desires. This revelation leads Kazuya to realize that these 3 were quite rude and bullied Isuzu, a specific teacher whom they never paid attention to. In the afternoon, the group decides to talk to her to verify their theory, and indeed, after connecting the pieces, Kazuya realizes that the core of the Amasogi is in their teacher's pillow. Upon arriving in her home, Kukuri informs them that Isuzu has escaped into her dream world to avoid further interrogation. This is a smart move, since if Kazuya were to destroy the object with his hands, Isuzu might not wake up again. Kukuri summons Bakura of Tsugomomo, who is literally a pillow with the ability to enter other people's dreams. Bakura explains that if they want to recover their teacher, they must convince her to return to reality without getting hurt in her dream. They enter Isuzu's dream world, where due to the spell, they change gender, but they quickly find their teacher in a trance. The presence of the curse has invaded this Amasogi to the extent that Isuzu now possesses supernatural powers in her dream. She could even enhance things she was already able to create before, resulting in strange and powerful shadow forms of herself. While Kazuya and Kiriha distract the other shadow forms, the real Isuzu appears to the rest of the group, explaining everything that has happened so far. It all started with stress from classes and the students' bad behavior. However, things worsened when she unknowingly used a pillow that dragged her into the world of her own shadow, giving it control over her body in the real world. Despite this, within the dream, the original Isuzu still exists, having adopted an adolescent form to escape her shadow's control. Osamu, with permission, draws a plan on paper to enhance her powers and summon supportive objects during the fight. After a tough battle, the real Isuzu manages to find the core of her desire and destroys the pillow imprisoning her. This not only liberates her from the dream, but also helps her gain more confidence in her role as a teacher. The good news doesn't last long, because the next morning, Kazuya receives a visit from Sunao, who is worried because Kotetsu is stuck in his katana form and won't wake up. When a Tsugomomo is alive but lacks enough energy to project their physical form, the only solution is to use the Divine Navel Echo Stone. This stone acts as an altar with a lot of spiritual energy, but it also poses many instabilities, making it dangerous for Sunao to go alone. Kiriha immediately decides to help, and within minutes, they arrive at the hotel where they'll stay before heading to the Divine Navel Cave. Ironically, this mission makes Sunao realize what a healthy relationship between a Tsugomomo and a bearer should be. Although Kazuya and Kiriha are quite intimate in certain aspects, they demonstrate how much they care for and enjoy each other's company. Kazuya feels a bit guilty for being the only one able to enjoy such moments, but Kiriha explains that there is something much deeper behind it all. The following morning, Kazuya continues with a plan to visit the Divine Navel Cave. Unfortunately, the place is filling with repressed Amasogi, and they find Kotetsu trapped in a cocoon. Kazuya and Kiriha create a barrier to buy Sunao some time to understand that Kotetsu is afraid and insecure because he believes Sunao will call them useless. She has always blamed him for her brother's death. However, in the midst of intense fighting and mutual feelings, they both understand that their past misunderstandings are not what holds them back. Instead, it's a need in their hearts to be by each other's side. With these words of sincerity, Kotetsu breaks the seal of his cocoon, and both he and Sunao achieve something they once thought impossible. They've formed a connection, and after many years, they successfully activate the divine possession. Back in the city on a normal school day, Isuzu goes to the office's classroom to tell the protagonist something she remembered from when she was under the control of the Amasogi. In short, it's a good clue to verify the theory that someone is behind the malice and incidents. It seems that someone has been inciting people to create Amasogists like the teacher, who created one from a pillow given to her by a girl who doesn't remember it well. All of this is connected to the recent incidents our friends have experienced at school, and it turns out to be a responsibility of Mimane and the rest of the Tsukumogamis, who are collaborating with a black obi calling itself Azami. To better understand this part, we have to go back hundreds of years to the past when 3 objects from an ancient family were born as spirits, eager to serve their master. This is where we meet Arumi, the crystal ball that can see the future, Akido, a pair of scissors turned guardian, and Hifuma, a dice that alters the course of destiny depending on what you say with its rolls. Initially, the appearance of these 3 siblings was great news for the village chief, but everything changed when strange monsters started to appear in the village after a few weeks. At the same time, Heifumi's health worsened, all because of the same person who welcomed them as family. As expected, this man became obsessed with the power of the dice of destiny and began using it without considering the consequences. With this in mind, Akito led the villagers to revolt against their leader, but he never thought that the villagers would also be ruthless with the tool that brought them misfortune. The lives of these 3 were about to end because, as we remember, when a Tsugomomo has no owner, it weakens until it disappears completely. However, after many years of wandering aimlessly, a strange being opened a door to their world, which turned out to be a place where all ownerless spirits gathered to reclaim their purpose. Tamon, the elder of the place, welcomed them to Meioiga, the lost village, a space that is technically the interior of a Tsugomomo that sacrificed its own body to create a paradise without humans. In time, this pair of siblings adapted well to the village and its inhabitants, but things weren't always rosy. Eventually, Tamon decided to be honest with them and told them that many centuries ago, a catastrophic eruption destroyed the world as they knew it, causing the Tsugomomo to exhaust all their energy and revert to soulless objects. Amidst all this chaos, Mairahi, a spirit of the village, decided to gather a select group of people to kill the deity of the region for betraying their kind and to obtain its fragment. In short, each deity has one of these fragments inside them, giving them the power to become gods. However, back then, Mairahi couldn't control all that energy, so he isolated himself from the world to protect this fragment, which came directly from the Malison. Clearly, the power of this little stone is depleting, and that's where the rest of the Tsugomomo accepted into the village come in. The purpose of this supposed home is to create a group of spirits with enough aptitude to deity again and restore the peace they enjoy living there. With the situation clear, both Akito and Arumi joined this group, and with the Oracle's abilities, they began searching for their new target to destroy. However, in one of these premonitions, they stumbled upon something they shouldn't have awakened. Due to their desire for power, they unleashed the Black Obi Azami, a Tsugomomo known as the Destroyer of Gods. From that point on, the rest is history. But while this group of spirits decided to take human form and pretend to be high school students, they never realized that Azami was using them all along to reach its true objective, exterminating Kiriha, its counterpart. Obviously, these Tsugomomo know nothing about this, and that's why they act as if they have control over everything they do, which isn't entirely true. As a result of crossing the limits imposed by the girl with the Black Obi, both Akito and Mimane end up trapped with Kazuya and Kiriha in an amasoji that turns out to be a video game console. The problem is that apparently the only way to escape is by fulfilling the creator's desire, which unfortunately happens to be a geek who only cares about playing fighting games. Moreover, in this virtual reality, our waifu's abilities are not the same as in the real world, as everything here is based on the rules within the game. However, after a while we see that Akito, being a gamer himself, puts aside his rivalry with the protagonist and focuses on defeating as many enemies as possible to reach the final bosses. As expected in the last levels, things get more serious, and that's where Kazuya also demonstrates that he's a huge geek for this kind of game, executing some impressive combos that fulfill the creator's wish and in turn give him a new outlook on life, urging him to take a breath of real air. Back in the real world, Azami seems to get angry seeing its plan frustrated. Unintentionally, it breaks part of the ceiling, but luckily, the protagonist manages to save her at the last second and places her in a safe spot. Although it's a brief moment, this girl gives us a small hint that perhaps she isn't as evil as we thought. However, we can't discover much more about her true intentions as she immediately decides to disappear from the place. Days later, by the coincidence of life, Kazuya gets into trouble with another amasoji. This time, though, he has the chance to meet Akito's sister because once again, these Tsugomomo appear at the worst possible moment. The game is a bit different this time, as to complete it, they have to pass all the couple tests and answer supposedly romantic questions that appear on the screen. Among the bad things, the advantage is that 2 perfect couples form with a long history together. On one side, Akito and Arumi are siblings, and on the other, Kazuya and Kiriha's past goes back before the protagonist's birth. As expected, each box's tests delve into quite personal matters, but the real problem arises at the end when the game's moderator asks them to name their partner's favorite girl. Naturally, Kiriha confidently answers with her name, but for the moment, this isn't the correct answer, leaving only the siblings who luckily had it quite easy since Arumi will never forget how Akito loved Hifumi until his without even realizing it. A joke aside, the protagonist decides to invite his friends to join the consulting office since they have been of great help in dealing with the amasoji issue. As a side note, later on, we learn that Kazuya's ideal girl is basically a female version of himself as he feels happy having someone who understands him so well in all of his troubles. However, despite this perhaps strange feeling, in reality, this sense of loneliness and emptiness toward other people has been present since he was a child. These emotions act involuntarily because our boy has something that blocks all those memories. Or, well, that's what he's been doing until now, because after a few weeks in a sort of dream, Kanaka appears to the protagonist to explain that he must be prepared for what's coming since the seal is about to break. She is eager to see her son's return, and Azami has been waiting for this moment all its life. Although we still don't know its true intentions, it's clear that it's highly interested in what will happen to our protagonist. Thanks to these feelings, the girl with the black obi gives permission for the Tsugomomo to join the group of the protagonist's friends, as they still need to fulfill their mission of killing Tsukuri to obtain a deity's fragment. With this in mind, both Akito and Mimane pretend once again to be regular students. However, Mimane doesn't mind showcasing her Tsukumogami powers, and we see that they come from a mirror. In short, whatever this girl sees can be reflected, not only duplicating the original, but also copying its abilities, whether human or Tsugomomo, like Kiriha. The funny thing is that Mimane's true power isn't entirely her control over the mirror. Rather, it's her ease in gaining people's trust. Literally, not even a day has passed since they met, and the little girl is already sleeping in Kazuya's house. Obviously, this could be a double-edged sword because, due to these small distractions, Kokuri ignores the alert sent by the region's barrier and carelessly sends Kokyu to deal with the problem. To understand this part of the story better, we need to go back to the encounter with the four intruders, who initially seemed like a group of harmless spirits looking for a new place to live. However, out of nowhere, they revealed their true intentions and mercilessly attacked Kokyu. The good thing is that Taguri felt that something was wrong and arrived just in time to save her, and in the end, the situation didn't escalate further. With this in mind, Kokuri understands that these Tsukumogamis, besides being stragglers from Mayoiga, the lost village where Akito and the others live, have come here to kill her and steal her fragment, just like they did in the past with the other deity. She knows she's not currently in a condition to defend herself from her enemies, as her sanctuary's destruction weakened her, and she's not as strong as before. Despite this, Kokuri has the support of Taguri and the protagonist. However, there's a small problem. Kiriha trusts Mimane so much that she asks for her help in defeating the Tsukumogamis coming after her fragment. Obviously, this information is relayed to the rest of the group, and Yasuki, the operations leader, tells them that this is the perfect opportunity to join forces with the other spirits and execute the final part of their plan. Later that same night, our buddies gather to begin their confrontation. Taguri decides to take on the shield and the fan, while Mimane and Akito choose to go after the axe. Kiriha and the protagonist must face the flute head-on. Initially, one might think that the infiltrators from Azami and the Tsukumogami from Mayoiga would form an alliance. However, in reality, we come to realize that it is quite the opposite. They were always divided, each wanting to be the one to kill the deity first. As expected, none of the battles were easy. Even Taguri, being a deity, faced several problems with the defense of the chubby one. But undoubtedly, the one who had the toughest time was Kazuya. Not only did he have to face the most powerful one of all, but he also felt compelled to use the divine possession to try to measure up. However, this was not the typical technique we had seen before. This time, something changes within the protagonist. He unleashes the full potential of Aya Sakura in such a way that, if Kiriha hadn't stopped him, he would have completely disintegrated the flutist. Ironically, Taguri did not do the same. She sent them to a better place because they angered her. But the most surprising thing is that Akito also decided to finish off the axe despite being friends from the same village. However, thanks to these little details, Mimane realized that this group was just a distraction to keep everyone away from Kyukuri. The real from Mayoiga would extract her fragment. Back at the Akuzen's sanctuary, we see that the little girl's assumptions were correct, but she got one small detail wrong. She can't attempt to kill the goddess when she hurt her beloved Kokyu. Somehow, Kokuri finds the strength and proceeds to take them down one by one, avenging everything they did to Kokyu. In the end, with some impressive moves we hadn't seen before, she disintegrates all the Tsukumogami. The downside is that having dealt with all those involved leaves our friends in the same situation. Their initial idea was to weaken them and then interrogate them about what's happening in Mayoiga. Despite this, later that same night, we learn from Arumi that her village is in trouble. A rebellion has started against their leader. Adding to this problem is the fact that Kiriha has been distant with the protagonist since he used her in the fight. For the first time, Kazuya gave her a direct order, calling her Aya Sakura by name, which he had never done before, as they always work as a team. Moving back to the Mayoiga problem, Azami summons her Tsukumogami to show them the current situation. In short, the rest of the inhabitants got tired of waiting for the deity's fragment and decided to escape the village to go after Kyukuri themselves. These radicals, in addition to rising against their leader, committed the one act forbidden by the taboos, feeding on humans. Normally, if Tsukumogami derives power from working with a person, But these rebels grew tired of that pact and chose to drain all their energy to become Kumhambers, a spirit with exceptional power that gradually loses reason until becoming a soulless monster. All this desperation for power began because, according to the old man from the village, the fragment of their former deity only has a few months left to live. This puts the inhabitants of Mayoiga in a tight spot as they are on the verge of losing their home. Realizing this, Kukuri understands that if they came for her once, they will do it again. So to be prepared, she calls on Sunao and Kotetsu to reinforce her and deal with the next wave of rebels. Ironically, this pair not only stays to live in the protagonist's house, but also joins his school to be as close as possible to Kukuri. Or at least that was the intention, but they end up in separate classes. Despite everything, at least the redhead makes an effort to find small opportunities with Kazuya, whether in the clinic or during training, always seeking a way to spend time with the boy who means more to her than just a friend. However, at the moment, the protagonist is not thinking about romance because he still feels the thorn in his relationship with Kiriha. Since the day they fought against Mayoiga's rebels, she hasn't spoken to him. The good thing is that the protagonist talks to the right person, Sunao, who experienced something similar when Kotetsu felt used as a mere tool. These words make Kazuya understand that his waifu probably felt the same way. So being the good protagonist he is, he goes to Kiriha to tell her that no one can replace her because, in the end, she is the sole reason for his happiness. This tender moment restores their trust in each other, and the next morning we see that they are not only recovered enough to face the challenge, but also stronger than ever because their connection has become something special. The downside is that while all this was happening in the Lost Village, we see that Mayurahi, the man possessed by the fragment of the curse, has awakened after many years. His goal is to go to the regional deity's city and put an end to her life. Suddenly, the Tsukumogami from Mayoiga set off from their village to the Hakuzen Sanctuary Mountain, where Kazuya and his friends are ready to confront all the rebels who dare to harm their little Kukuri. Before they arrive, Zemi appears before Mirahi to tell him that they can do whatever they want with the deity of this place. However, they are forbidden from attacking the exorcist who is with her, clearly referring to her desire to keep the protagonist for her own plan. Now, as the arc for Mayoiga is about to enter the lands of our friends, we see that Hinoka, Sunao's master, volunteers to be the first line of defense. Despite technically belonging to another region, she is here to defend her friend and her apprentice from any danger. Thanks to Mimane's powers, a part of the group slips through and reaches the top of the Hakuzen Sanctuary. There, Kukuri simply tells them that their reason for fighting is defying the laws of nature since deities can never equal an omnipotent being. In the midst of all this, Mayurai starts pressuring our goddess, hoping to corner her enough to release the region's barrier. This would allow Azami to finally enter her former home. In the downside, all this power returns to its bearer, and once again we see the patron of Hakuzen, the complete form of the water deity. As expected, the girl with the black obi makes her appearance, and to everyone's surprise, she has only sought one thing all these years: to take the fragment of the curse from Meirahi and bring back Kanaka, its former bearer. To better understand this part, it turns out that Azami, or rather the two Azemis, are actually Amasogas created by Kazuya when he was a child. These two spirits, directly linked to the curse, managed to possess his mother and now are part of her, leading to everything we saw in his memories, the fights where he saw Kira suffer and the day he saw her. As expected, this reality shock leaves the protagonist so stunned that he doesn't know what to do to save his mother. But unfortunately, there is no way to save her because Kanaka has been resting in a better place for a long time. Amidst all this chaos, Kukuri feels compelled to confess that what is in front of them is only an empty vessel controlled by one of her demons. Moreover, the true objective of these Amasokas is to kill him and take his extract of the curse. With this in mind, the only one who can finish what he started is Kazuya himself. As Azami is his creation, if someone else destroys them, it would create a rebound that would cause his instant, releasing an energy aura similar to a nuclear bomb. Suddenly, the protagonist finds himself obligated to fight against his own mother and kill her in the process. Poor guy. However, he is not yet ready to unleash his full potential due to the seal inside his head. Because of this, Kukuri decides that breaking that spell will be their last option, and until then, they will try together with the others to stop the most powerful version of Kanaka. Just to give you an idea of how strong this woman is with the Emasoji's possession, not even Tagure with all her tricks, combined with Sunao's divine possession technique, can completely stop her. Even Kukuri, in her final form, is defeated to the point where she is completely disintegrated. According to Kanaka's account, in her last fight before dying, she left one of her Azamis in the city. This gave her enough time to understand how the divine possession works in Amasogas. Now Kazuya has no choice but to face the demon he created. However, before the battle begins, Kiriha remembers that she still has a promise to fulfill. Without hesitation, she decides that if necessary, she will sacrifice her own body to protect the one thing that gives meaning to her life. This powerful image causes the protagonist to completely break his seal and fall into an unconscious state. To make it easier to understand, we receive a good explanation from Aoi Oriobana, the leader of Suzeraden, a school for malice and exorcists. Just after Kazuya falls in the middle of the fight, Kasumi appears alongside Saori, her own Tsukumogami, who has the power to create a time barrier that was able to contain Kanaka for the next 3 years. This sacrifice aims to give Kazuya a chance to first understand everything that is happening. Yes, this time is real, and the deaths of Kukuri and Kiriha are real. Second, he can prepare himself for the day of the final battle. Bodhi tells him that at this point, his only option is to go with her to Suzeraden and train for 2 years and 362 days. When Sori's barrier breaks, he'll have the strength to defeat Kanaka, who is now considered the gods. With literally no other alternative to deal with this problem, Kazuya decides to have his days of mourning to remember everything he experienced alongside his loved ones. After that time, he chooses to smile again. However, it's not because he's happy with his current life. It's a smile of hope for all the souls that have protected him until now. He understands that it's time to take control of his own destiny, and nobody else can fight the battle that awaits him because, in the end, our boy is no longer just a bearer of Tsugomomo. What an ending! See you later, folks.